Bahleli bonke etilongweni, bahleli bonke kwanongqongqo. Bahleli bonke etilongweni, bahleli bonke kwanongqongqo.
I would like to take this opportunity to also congratulate NADEL on its sustained efforts to strengthen the profession and the rule of law through initiatives such as the recently launched NADEL Constitutional Training Program and platforms such as this National Policy Conference. Just glancing at some of the topics that are being covered during this conference, it is clear to see that this gathering remains a critical platform for addressing some of the burning issues that prevent us from reaching our achieving dream of a better South Africa for all. Issues such as social injustice, exploitation, human rights, human indignity, inequality, and economic imbalances. To us, as LexisNexis, sustainable social, political, and economic progress can only thrive where the rule of law exists. Our single-minded purpose globally is to advance the rule of law, which we believe is the very foundation for the development of peaceful, equitable, and prosperous societies. Robust states and economies are dependent upon the existence of clear laws that govern societies and commerce. Yet, as we have witnessed all too often in our own country, and as the theme of this conference suggests, poverty, inequalities, and corruption are symptoms of a state in gradual collapse. We continue to witness the demise of the rule of law, or the complex lack or absence thereof. This results in a crippled economy, poor governance, and ongoing inequality. This is why it is especially important that legal professionals acting under the umbrella of esteemed organizations such as NADEL continue to organize themselves and that they collectively act and speak out against state capture and the abuse of state organs, intelligence services, and prosecutorial authority. As LexisNexis, we pledge our commitment to support you in all these efforts. LexisNexis works closely with a number of legal organizations to advance the rule of law. Among them are the Law Society of South Africa, the General Council of the Bar of South Africa, with which we run a successful development program that has spanned 7 years and provided technology resources and superior legal research tools for more than 200 newly qualified, previously disadvantaged legal professionals to help them to set up their practices. We also work with probono.org, the Women Legal Center, and many more NGOs and civil society organizations. As a business, we continue to advance and support a strong, independent judiciary, impartially enforced laws and contracts so that citizens, institutions, and foreign investors can be protected by arbitrary forces, from arbitrary forces. One such demonstration is our partnership with the United Nations Global Compact Business. We partnered with them by playing host to 2 UN Global Compact Business Rule of the Law consultation workshops. As the first of their kind on African soil, these workshops provided Ugandans and South African stakeholders with an opportunity to make their contribution to the Business for the Rule of Law framework, which would later be released and made available to all businesses. We were part of a global consultation process, engaging nearly 400 senior representatives in 20 countries, government officials, legal practitioners, academics, and other members of civil organizations. The purpose of the Business for the Rule of Law framework is to provide guidance on how business can respect and support the rule of law in a relatable context. At LexisNexis, we see ourselves as a vital partner to the legal industry, business sector, and to governmental bodies in South Africa. This year is a very big year for us at LexisNexis as we mark 85 years of operation in South Africa. Throughout that existence, we have been intimately involved in the journey of the legal industry in this country. From our early beginnings as a legal print publisher, established in 1934, to our changing role as a provider of professional workflow solutions, our intention has been to support the legal industry and to provide solutions that keep clients on top of changing technological, regulatory, and competitive environments. Today, legal tech is our central core of our business and a success leading us into the digital legal content era. Our role is to provide you with easy access to information, technology, mobility, online research, and superior content you need to make a difference in your practice and law. We have also superior governance, risk, and compliance solutions, as well as data services and business software solutions that support professionals and organizations even outside of the legal sector in their pursuit of good governance and compliance. LexisNexis knows that we have a joint responsibility to see young people, women, and the previously disadvantaged becoming successful lawyers who uphold the rule of law with great integrity and provide affordable access to justice to all. This is a daunting but exciting time in the history of South Africa and for the legal profession specifically. The implementation of the Legal Practice Act is ushering in a new era with the aim of transforming and improving access to the profession. It is a period of great opportunity as we face frequent upheaval politically and as we continue to fight poverty, inequalities, and corruption. There is the opportunity for the profession to remain steadfast in its commitment to act honorably and with strict adherence to integrity and ethics. Law is indeed a profession that has the ability to transform the lives of the most vulnerable and marginalized in the most significant way. As LexisNexis, you have our ongoing support as you set out to do so each day. I thank you once again for the opportunity for LexisNexis to collaborate with you and the opportunity to address all of you today. I wish you continued robust engagements, debate, and clear resolutions for the remainder of this important gathering. May NADEL continue to play such a leading role in the transformation of legal structures and training institutions in South Africa, and may it continue to ensure access to justice and the realization of civil, political, and social economic rights. I thank you. So now that we've got business out of the way, I always get to do a little bit of a fun part. Pam, do you have our names here for us? And I think I am the only person that's got Deputy Minister JJ as my assistant, hey? He's been assisting me at many conferences in doing the draw for me. So we all know this is completely above board. There's nothing in it for him, and I can't be accused of anything. Now you better draw right today, hey?
Okay, got one.
Ah, he's got one.
Must I read it out or hand it to you?
No, you announce.
Okay, I announce. Wow, the winner is John Jeffrey.
Congratulations.
No, the winner is Sinenhlanhla Shezi. There she is.
Okay. So where is our winner? Not here.
Okay.
So we all know the rule. We move on to the next one. Is she there? Why is she not coming? Okay, now there's one condition before you can get this prize. It's a lovely Bluetooth speaker, a Harman Kardon. The value is 5,000. I know the quality of that speaker. It's very, very good, but it's got one condition. the first song you have to play on it, because I'm a reggae chick, must be a reggae song. You have to go for Buffalo Soldier, my darling.
Thank you very much. At least let's move forward with our program. Sorry. Thank you. At this stage, we will be calling our panel for this session. But before, as I call them, as they are approaching the stage, Professor Thuli Matonsela and Advocate Nokukanya Jele. Just one story that I can share with you. When we invited, I'm sharing this story much to the embarrassment of the advocate. When we were appointed to that commission of inquiry, that panel for the national director, it was dubbed a male panel, an all-male panel, I remember the correct word. Now everybody is starting to ask, what is the president doing? There was a stage amongst ourselves, we discussed, gentlemen were all male here. What do we do? But each person was not prepared to withdraw. I said, Mr. Skoko, can you please, your deputy there is a female, can you withdraw? He said, no, I thought you would withdraw, Mr. Bridges. And we approached, the last, I think it was Mr. Scott. Mr. Scott, we have a very good candidate. It's like if Janine can replace you here. He said, what? I've been suspecting you, Nokesi. You are the one who is captured here. Each of us was saying, why you are refusing to withdraw? Perhaps we have a mandate on this matter. Then we have to all refuse to withdraw. None of anyone from the presidency intervened. There were every attacks on televisions, on paper. The president had every opportunity to disband that panel, have it started afresh, but they did not. I only understand the reason later, after everything was done. The reason was simple. They wanted that process to be independent. It was up to the profession to disgrace itself by not involving me, women. And there was one person who must have said that. I won't tell, guess who was. Can I now call you to the stage? I'm not too sure how are you going, because this session, we were deliberate in our choice for this session. We're very much deliberate because we invite women who understand exactly what we're talking about. These are both practicing advocates. These are both activists. These are both revolutionaries. They know what were the objectives of the struggle. They know what the experience in the practice is, and they exactly understand what they are asked to discuss about. And I'm not even prepared to give a colorful background, CVs. Google there, it is written, their CVs is there. Can I now hand over to you, comrades? You will do for that.
Thank you very much, Comrade Nyotesi. I'm glad that you realized why the presidency did not intervene. The independence, I believe, of the profession must be reflected in everything it does. I think it's hugely appropriate that this topic, the topic we've been asked to speak on, a better South Africa shall only be realized once inequalities cease to exist, has been raised by an organization such as NADEL, as it is the foundation of this organization to bring together legal minds, lawyers, legal practitioners, legal students, whose aim it is to use what they know and what they can do to help others. Lawyers are, in my view, uniquely placed to work towards equality being realized for all. They are often the conduit through which this endeavor is accomplished, whether it is contributing to the drafting of the Constitution, drafting legislation, or ensuring the law is applied and is applied equally to all. The first step, I believe, to reduce inequality is therefore to have more lawyers. Yes, more. Because after all, we are lovely human beings. And if we're properly trained, and if we are taught to focus on how our work affects the most vulnerable, the poor, the Gogo Dlaminis, increasing the ranks of lawyers is increasing the ranks of soldiers for access to rights set out in our Constitution. It's increasing the number of advocates for accountability. This requires, naturally, that there be access to the profession itself, and means doing away with a system that limits access to persons, for example, who can afford to spend an entire year earning nothing or next to nothing. What will determine whether or not lawyers are equipped to fulfill this responsibility of being voices for the voiceless is indeed how they are trained once they make the decision to join this profession. There's a role to play here for organizations such as NADEL. A role, for example, in securing sufficient community work obligations for all lawyers when we go about drafting the rules that will govern our profession. When we input into the regulations, for example, that need to unpack Section 29 of the Legal Practice Act, let's make sure that that community work provides an opportunity for us to give back whilst we are training ourselves. A role in ensuring courses being taught to aspiring lawyers include an appreciation for the impact of the law on reduction of inequalities, and the wonders, for example, of public interest litigation, the value of learning legislative drafting, and boy, do we need a lot more people who can do that, and the realities faced when the majority of individuals attempt to access justice and the responsibilities lawyers have to facilitate that access. Because I've seen so many new NADEL faces, which is an absolute joy for me, I'm going to revert back to a story that Comrade Max loves me to tell, which is a story about the first job I had working full-time for the NADEL Human Rights Project. It was outreach work, the value of which was about as useful to the people we were engaging with as it was to me as a lawyer. We engaged with people and aimed to ensure that we protected and advocated for their rights. I was an LLB student at the time. I had a degree that allowed me to do research work. And what we did was we went door to door in vulnerable communities of the Western Cape and Eastern Cape. We had questionnaires that we had formulated ourselves that were aimed at development and protection and advocacy for socioeconomic rights of those particular communities. And what our job was to get the views of individuals in Site B, in Datsane, in Duncan Village, in Langa, get their views on how their socioeconomic rights should be fulfilled or could be better fulfilled. Comrade Max hates it when I mention my salary when I was doing that job, so I won't do that. Are you sure I can? Oh, no, he's waving. Okay, I won't. The amazing value of that for me as a legal student was understanding and learning to appreciate the impact that the work I was learning to do could have on the day-to-day lives of human beings within our communities. We would collate the information we received, we would use it to advocate for policy choices, we would use it when we lobbied in Parliament, we would use it when we engaged with government structures, we would use it when we engaged with donors about where they ought to be donating money and what kind of donations they should give in the NGO and civil society. It taught me more about what mattered to those communities and how I, as a lawyer, could help raise the profile of the issues that mattered to those communities. And I do believe that young lawyers today should do that kind of work systematically. I think it is invaluable for their development, while at the same time contributing to those communities that they might be speaking to. I must emphasize the issue of lawyers' contribution to drafting of legislation. The rules that govern the way our society works directly impact the day-to-day lives of our people. They need to be evidence-based, these rules, these regulations, these pieces of legislation. They need to have fully factored in the practical consequences of their contents, and they need to be aimed at more than just delineating the lines that should not be crossed. Legislation can be the brick and mortar on which a society is built. Think of the Constitution as its foundation, and think of laws and legislation as the bricks and mortar. I believe lawyers' bodies should be at the forefront of inputs into legislation and regulations, which is why I was uniquely proud to see the NADEL delegation contributing to the discussion about whether or not we should amend Section 25 of the Constitution. And I fully appreciate that ensuring legislation is properly drafted may reduce litigation work for those of us who work in that field in the long run, but it is an invaluable contribution to certainty, regulatory certainty, to framing and maintaining those building blocks on the basis of which our state and our economy function. We continue to need to advocate for fundamental changes in briefing patterns. In my view, these can only benefit the increase in access to justice by increasing the pool of lawyers that individuals can look to for help, because it increases the pool of lawyers that have sufficient experience in as wide a variety of fields of law as possible. The more varied work lawyers get, the more they are able to contribute to the substantive transformation of our society as a whole. It is all very well to demand pro bono and community work of lawyers, but if they don't also have sufficiently paid work, it's fundamentally unfair. I believe what I have described above is a continuation and an inspiration of the traditional role that NADEL was created to play. But in the situation we face today in South Africa, there are other ways of making a contribution. After all, we all accept that the struggle for full equality is far from being accomplished. A great deal of amazing work is already being done. It's lawyers that helped us obtain results with regards to unequal deployment of police resources between rich and poor communities. It is lawyers and NGOs aimed at public interest law that have consistently helped develop our jurisprudence on access to housing and what that should entail. In the position I currently hold, I believe it's invaluable to have dedicated organizations highlighting gaps in the law or pointing to areas where improvement is possible. They firstly help ensure equal access for the poor to the courts. They help secure labor rights. They help enforce environmental rights, increase accountability of government structures, and help structure evidence being heard in those commissions of inquiry the president of NADEL was referring to. The question is, what role should such organizations play in addressing our current challenges? It is critical, I believe, to take time to consider the role lawyers play as a whole as it evolves and as the challenges we face evolve. It needs to be reflected in the actions we take in taking the country forward and in practical terms in the way we address current priorities. Now, you will allow me to take as examples of what these current priorities are, matters that were raised in the State of the Nation address given last month by President Ramaphosa. And as a first example, I would say, as we tackle gender-based violence, what role are lawyers playing? What roles are judges playing? The evidence that is admissible or not in such cases impacts on the lived experiences of all those affected. The manner in which it is gathered can worsen victimization. People in this room decide what those evidence rules should be and have the power to change them. Once they reach the bench, they should have been sufficiently conscientized to immediately challenge the relevance of the question, how short was her skirt? In advising corporate clients, what responsibility do we take in crafting their corporate responsibility goals, in transforming the economy and in focusing on growth of the economy? Do we include obligations towards youth employment, and do corporate lawyers factor those responsibilities in? Lastly, and again, I go back to the work that I had the privilege of doing for NADEL, civic education and rights awareness. When we talk about education and the development of education, which was highlighted in the State of the Nation address, the greatest means of empowering South Africans is making sure they know what their rights are and how to use them. There is a great deal of work to be done in ensuring all South Africans know what the public protector does and which government entity is responsible for making sure there are no sewage leaks in their street, how the National Assembly works, and where and when to make their views on the legislation it considers known, and who or which tribunal to turn to when their landlord suddenly doubles the rent. The more South Africans know their rights, the stronger the institutions they put on terms and keep on their toes will have to become, and that can only benefit us all immensely. All of the above, I believe, will contribute to decreasing inequalities and hopefully see us walk ever closer to true equality. Those are my short thoughts. I'm going to ask now Thuli to come through and give us hers. Thuli needs no introduction, but there is one aspect I was hoping to ask her, and I'm going to take advantage of having the podium to do that, is in her capacity when she was at the South African Law Reform Commission, what are her views on how legislation is being developed now and what we as lawyers in this room need to do to improve that process. Thank you.
Thank you for that great question, Advocate Chairman. Thank you to NADEL, the president of NADEL, Advocate Nechesi, and the entire leadership of NADEL, firstly for inviting me to this event, but secondly for making this event possible. Greetings to everyone, all of the distinguished guests in this room, without mentioning all of you by name, but just to say that we have among us esteemed judges from all of the courts of our land. We have the Deputy Minister of Justice. We have various academics, attorneys, etc. It is a privilege indeed to be in this important gathering. This session is supposed to discuss, is a better South Africa only possible if we realize equality? Or is a better South Africa only possible once inequality ceases to exist? My answer is, a better South Africa cannot be realized when we are blind to inequality and poverty, when we make day-to-day decisions, including developing laws and policies, as well as implementing such laws and policies. This, of course, also includes litigation and judging. Advocate Jale asked me to comment on how we make laws compared to how we made laws at the dawn of democracy. I hadn't factored that in my discussion, but that's a very good question. I can say that how we make laws now, there's two differences between what we do now and what we did at the dawn of democracy. What we did at the dawn of democracy was we did papers, green papers, white papers, and then the laws followed. Alternatively, we had a law commission deal with it. What were the advantage of doing that? Twofold. One was participation. When the process is transparent and not opaque, there's a possibility for ordinary people to engage with the process, to understand the why, but not just to understand, but also to inform the process. That was the importance of the way we did things then and the way we do things now. The second difference is a systems approach. If you're going to do a white paper, you're going to look at also the knock-on effects of the law you designed. At the moment, each department just comes up with a law, and quickly the law goes into Parliament and the law is implemented without looking at what will be the knock-on effect on the rest of the system. Does that have implications for equality? you make that judgment. My current focus as a professor of law at Stellenbosch University is a focus on combating poverty and structural inequality by using the Global Development Goals, which are referred to as Sustainable Development Goals, and National Development Goals opportunities to mobilize academic and civil society inputs, including business resources, to design and review policies to improve their likely impact on social justice. The support activities of the program we're involved in include mobilizing funding for a social justice agenda. I'm also involved in the Tuma Foundation, which is a social movement vehicle that fosters democracy, literacy, and leadership to ensure that democracy works for all. We've been told this morning that when democracy doesn't work for certain groups, they opt out. The Chief Justice talks about people using self-help to get what they believe they deserve. So we try to make sure that people engage with democratic processes, they understand democracy, and they make it work for themselves and for others. And one of our projects as the Tuma Foundation, which is our game-changing project, is something called Tuma Enterprising Communities Initiative, which empowers communities to translate global and national development goals into community and personal development goals, whilst facilitating partnerships with business and government to end poverty and reduce structural inequality by 2030, with an emphasis on sustainable development goals number 1, number 5, and number 10. I've mentioned that my role at the moment, apart from teaching for 25% of my time, is helping a policy development process that factors equality and poverty awareness in day-to-day decisions. It's simply about social impact awareness. Most of the time when we worry about equality, whether it's about gender or disability or older persons, we think about how do we create an in-rem. If you think about society as a freeway, and we're all on the freeway, whenever we think about women, people with disabilities, older persons, etc., we always look at how do we find an in-rem to bring them into the mainstream. Well, Bishop Tutu said, maybe we should ponder what's throwing them out. Before we create these little in-rems that bring them back in, we have to ponder, why are they out? Because my research, which I spent 1 year at Harvard doing, showed me that we achieve less in building these little in-rems that try to bring people back to society than the damage we do by leaving the mainstream as it is, whilst it keeps throwing them out. So how do we throw them out? Let me tell you a story about Mr. and Mrs. G. This is a case I dealt with, a real-life story, Eastern Cape, Port Elizabeth. A real-life story of Mr. and Mrs. G are small business people that work very hard to build their business. And one day they found themselves being a subcontractor to somebody to build houses, RDP houses for our government. They built the houses, and once they had finished everything except the top structure, which is the roof, ceiling and roof, the municipality said the money has been exhausted. This was a defined grant. A defined grant means when the province or national gives money to a municipality and says it's to do 1, 2, 3, then the municipality can't do 6, 7, and 8. But the municipality had done 6, 7, and 8 with that money. And that's why there was no money for the roofs. And then somebody in the municipality said to Mr. and Mrs. G, continue and finish the top roof. but they didn't do so in writing. Whose job was it to make sure that that was done in writing? In terms of Section 195 of the Constitution, the public service should operate in terms of the highest level of professional ethics. So whose job was it to do the right thing? The municipality. Thank you, ma'am. Anyway, Mr. and Mrs. G finished their job, and as usual, once the houses had been built, there was a lovely event where the keys were, the key turning event, and we find a cute grandmother to whom we're going to give the key, and everybody is happy we are delivering to our people. And then Mr. and Mrs. G had been told, proceed, when the next financial cycle comes, you are going to get your money. They came to collect their money, and government didn't say, we don't owe you. Government said, we don't know you. Sounds funny, but as lawyers, you know what I don't know you means. It means, legally speaking, you don't have local standard. In this particular case, government didn't say we don't owe you. They argued two things. The first thing was, you're not the main contractor. And the main contractor had not gotten involved because it's expensive to sue. But sometimes main contractors are the guy with a suitcase and the connection. They collect the tender, they pass it on to someone else, they get their cut, and they live happily ever after. So they said, we don't know you. The second argument was the original contract was saying all instructions will be given in writing. And the instruction for you to proceed after the money was exhausted was not given in writing. Mr. and Mrs. G had gone to court, and they had lost the case on these two grounds. We don't know you, and we didn't tell you in writing. But whose job was it to make sure that the Gs were told in writing how to do the right thing? But basically, a decision was made by a court that government has done nothing wrong. And there's nothing wrong with the decision that was made by a court, because courts are structured in such a way that whatever choice of law you've made, you're confined to it. The way we do courts at the moment, litigation, if I come and say I'm suing on delict, you can't turn around and say we're going to go into administrative law. If I come and I say I'm suing on contract, the judge can't amend the pleadings. It's interesting because we're confined to these things that were designed in antiquity, but we haven't asked ourselves, can we change them? With the public protector, it didn't matter. You came here and said the Department of Public Works has wronged you. We look at who exactly is in charge of that, and we say, oh, you're wrong. It's not the Department of Public Works. It's actually the Department of the South African Police Services. But we don't throw you away. We then just ask the South African Police Services, why did you wrong this person? But in this particular case, the decision of the court was that was in favor of government. And when the matter eventually came to the Pub Protector team in the Eastern Cape, they agreed that the government did not know this person. And when this matter eventually came to me and Deputy Pub Protector Kevin Malunga, we reviewed it and we see it. The court was right in terms of the law that was given to the courts. But the courts need to look at their own rules, and that's what Justice Mlambo is doing. And then we said, but this matter is coming to us. There's always this rule that says once a matter a matter has been determined by a court of law, it can't be determined by us. And there's precedent that was decided in Sweden by a court in Sweden relating to when a court has spoken, can a public protector or an ombudsman decide that matter? In Sweden, the decision was that you've got to look at what angle of this matter was dealt with by a court of law, and the issue that is being brought to the public protector, was it canvassed in court? And in our case, we found that the matter went to court not on maladministration. It went to court on a different matter, on contract. I then decided we do have jurisdiction, and the deputy agreed with me. We reheard this matter. And then we did our normal evaluation. What happened? what should have happened? Is there a discrepancy between what happened and what should have happened? And if there's a discrepancy, in other words, if government did what it was not supposed to do or failed to do what it was supposed to do, was somebody harmed or did somebody suffer prejudice? And our answer was yes, somebody suffered prejudice. But we still would ask, was there justification for government deviating from what it was required to? If there's reasonable justification for deviating, we would accept it. In this case, there was none. And the last question is, how then do we place as close as possible whoever was harmed to where they would have been if government had acted properly as required by the Constitution? And then we said they acted improperly, and because of that, the Gs are out of pocket. And the answer is, can the Gs be paid with interest? I wrote a report. Immediately, the municipality wrote back to me and said, we're going to pay them within 30 days. We celebrated as we used to celebrate as a Power Protector team until the administration changed. A new mayor came in shortly before the elections, and they changed their own letter, and they wrote back to me and said, we're not going to implement. And, you know, I never celebrate people's downfalls, but when that mayor didn't make it during the elections, I did celebrate. I'm sorry, they call it. So I thought that was the end of the story, that everything would have reverted to where it was. Sadly, last week when I spoke to a group like this, which is practitioners, administrative law practitioners, I told the story as one of the ways you have to be prepared to be wrong. To make right decisions, you have to have the courage to take decisions where you could end up being wrong. And most of the decisions I made as a Power Protector, I was grateful that the judges agreed with me. I thought they would have agreed with me on this one, because our state is not just built on law, it's built on ethics. And that glue between law and ethics makes sure that we close the gap between law and justice. And I was told by an attorney last week that this matter was taken on review, and two things happened. I was accused of overreaching my powers. My own office agreed and submitted to court to agree that I was wrong. I would have preferred my office to just be quiet. But anyway, the court then decided against, and I would welcome any lawyer who wants to help the Gs, because what we're doing is we are encouraging impunity. Because it boils down to what kind of society are we building? And for that society to materialize, it's not going to happen magically. It's going to happen when the state does what it's supposed to do, operates with the highest level of professional ethics, when civil society does what it's supposed to do, when business does what it's supposed to do. Rome did not fall in one day. It fell one day at a time when people allowed wrongdoing to happen. And usually when we think about unethical conduct, we worried about the people who steal from us, which we should worry. Corruption erodes everything that's good. But we should also worry about how we treat those without the voice that we have. How we use our power and privilege to interpret the law to make sure that the gap between law and justice does not allow people like the Gs to fall through the crack. Structural and systemic inequality is a threat to democracy, dear colleagues. It's already been said by other people, and as long as there's injustice somewhere, there can't be sustainable peace anyway. That's why people gather in the UN and they try to deal with poverty and inequality. That's why people gather in the ILO, because they have seen that social injustice is at the core of many of the problems we see in society. The editor of the Guardian Weekly said this recently: extreme inequality is one of the biggest drivers behind the political shocks we have seen in the last few years. The World Bank agrees, the IMF agrees, and I'm sure everyone in this room agrees. Is there anybody who disagrees? That inequality sabotages democracy, sabotages the rule of law, and is at the core of toxic relationships within society or polarized societies. What I learned as a Power Protector was that if we are going to have an accountable state, we need to deal with social injustice. Because corruption is one of the factors behind social injustice. Corruption undermines equality. If I am going to get privileges, for example, in terms of getting jobs, in terms of getting contracts, etc., because I've paid a bribe, or because of a questionable relationship I have with people in the state, that means equality between me and you has been undermined, isn't it? We're not competing on the same footing. So the first thing that is eroded by corruption in societies is equality, the right to equality, because we don't get treated equally. Of course, it erodes the rule of law as well, which requires that all of us should be treated equally. But the interesting thing that I found as a power protector was that when you don't address social injustice, the very victims of corruption, those at the receiving end of social injustice, are going to defend the corrupt. Because the corrupt are going to mobilize them. Because the corrupt don't pontificate about laws, rules, and everything. They talk about the small things that affect small people. Because small things are big things to small people. They also even give them the crumbs of corruption. They make sure that when they collect whatever big sums of money that they collect, they also bring food parcels to our communities, like the mafia. Do you know that the mafia pays tithe in church? And they have a Christmas party for grandmothers, and the corrupt do that. But why am I bringing that? I'm bringing that if people have to choose between a heartless society that is based on a rule of law and a society that is corrupt but seems to remember that they exist, they may gravitate towards the corrupt society. And what is my invitation to lawyers, but I suspect I'm speaking to the choir here, is it becomes important that when we apply the law, we don't worship at the altar of rules. We worship at the altar of justice. When we make... Thank you. When we make those decisions on a day-to-day basis, we should ask ourselves, will this advance equality? It is one of the values in Section 1 of our Constitution. Will this advance human dignity? Will this advance human rights and freedoms? Will it expand the frontiers of freedom for everyone, not just for one group in society? Will it lock us in the inequalities that were there in 1994, or will it begin to dismantle the inequalities that were reached in 1994? Judge Dennis Davis says every judge should do that. I have seen the Constitutional Court doing that. I've seen Judge Mlambo, who probably spoke about what he has done with the liquidations, with the foreclosures, where he doesn't just worship the rules. He looks at what is the impact of these rules. If I'm going to allow somebody to sell somebody at an auction, to sell somebody's house at an auction for 10,000 rand, when the value of that house is 500,000, is that justice? To say the rule allows me to do that means nothing, because you have a duty to be the guardian of the Constitution. And as a guardian of the Constitution, you can't say they made me do it. You have to stick to your own mandate, which is to make sure the Constitution has to serve everyone. The UN has a lovely slogan that says, leave no one behind. But we then have to ask ourselves, who is everyone? When we make every decision that we make, we have to say, how is it going to impact on grandmothers? How will it impact on children? How will it impact on people with disabilities? How will it impact on rural people? How will it impact on people in squatter camps? But also we have to ask ourselves about sustainability. Will this build an inclusive society? Will this build a sustainable society in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, 15 years' time, 20 years' time, etc.? In other words, what I'm asking is that we make sure that we have a social impact assessment, you might say, alone, there isn't much you can do. I think everyone in this house is privileged in one way or another, and underprivileged in one way or another. But we all can leverage the power and privilege we have to make a difference in every corner. Yes, the one thing that you do on any given day is not going to change the world, but it can change the life of someone who will eventually change the world. If you think about somebody like Pixley Kasem, one of those lawyers, disadvantaged like yourself, most black lawyers still suffer disadvantages, we've been told this morning. Most women still suffer disadvantages, as we've been told this morning. But none of us can say we are still living in that society that Pixley Kaseme lived in, where despite his legal qualifications, despite having a law firm, whenever he had to pass a white person, it didn't matter what was the status of that white person in society. It didn't matter whether it was a child. He had to take off his head and show respect. That was a different society, which then brings me to answer the question around, can a better society be realized without equality? I would like to say that the society is getting better. For me, today is better than yesterday. It could have been better had we done better, but it is better than yesterday, especially insofar as we have a constitution that recognizes the humanity of every person. We have a constitution that defines the vision of society we want to become. We have a constitution that defines the entitlements of every person. That constitution also defines the structure of the state and the character of the state. It also places accountability mechanisms that can make sure that we hold the state and everyone accountable should things go wrong. So if we have all of that in place, why are things not going right? I've already indicated that part of the problem is that we try to sort out equality by creating in-ramps. One of the young people in the social justice team, we call them ambassadors, he said it's like having a bucket that has holes and water is coming out. And instead of finding out where the holes are and fixing the hole, you keep taking a cup and collecting the water from the bottom and throwing it in. And that's what we do by coming up with laws like laws on gender equality, disability equality, and all of the laws that we come up with, when we don't look at what about the ordinary laws? What about the laws we pass every day that are not to address gender equality? What about the common law? When we interpret every day, do we think about what will be the impact on poverty? What will be the impact on inequality? And how do we then interpret those laws? How do we interpret those rules in such a way that we advance equality and we reduce poverty? Lastly, dear colleagues, if we create laws and we don't implement them, life is not going to change. You know, there's a growing problem of people insulting each other and people being called monkeys. And what has been the response? The response has been, let's criminalize hate speech. But what was the thinking under Mandela's time when we created an Equality Act that didn't just deal with anti-discrimination, but it also dealt with the promotion of equality? That promotion of equality, understood as the drafters of the Constitution understood, was that by stroke of a good Constitution, we're not going to become an equal society. We needed to audit the legacy of the past and then draw up pathways to reduce the imbalances of the past. But dear good people, literally 20 years since the Equality Act was passed, or 19 years since the Equality Act was passed, it remains unimplemented. You can pass as many hate speech laws as you want, as many anti-discrimination laws as you want. We are not going to be an equal society, Deputy Minister of Justice. We're not going to be an equal society unless we deal with the inherited disparities in a progressive way. And That is my appeal using this forum to say to the Department of Justice, can we please implement Chapter 5 of the Equality Act? I have since discovered why it didn't get passed. I'm told that an instrument called RIA was used. Advocate Jele. RIA was an instrument that was looking at regulatory impact assessment. But the person who assessed it at the conference I attended was that they were looking at regulatory impact assessment mostly in terms of how will business be affected by this. But even then, not how the Gs are going to be affected by this, more about how will big business be affected. And if it's going to affect big business negatively, we pull it back. We shouldn't do that. Plato advised that some things in society that have to be done are like a bitter pill. That you can't say you're only going to take things that are sweet to swallow. Some of them are going to be bitter, but we have to think about what is the long-term impact. Dear colleagues, we have an opportunity through the UN Sustainable Development Goals to look at what will be the impact of equality, will be the impact on poverty of everything that we do every day, even if you're advising clients on the other side. And thank you again, NADEL, for this forum. Thank you to the judges. Thank you to all of you for whatever you're doing to create the society of our dreams. The society we want will depend on what I do when I leave this room, breaking the four walls. What you do when you leave this room. Because I truly believe that every generation has an opportunity to change its life for the better. But each generation has a responsibility to make sure that it creates a better life for those who can't do so for themselves. Each generation also has a responsibility to make sure that the next generation need not climb the mountains that that generation has had to climb. The Pixley Kasemes removed mountains for us. The Mandelas removed mountains for us. Are we removing mountains for Mr. G and many others like him? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. It's time for us to engage with them both. We'll engage with Prof. I remember I'm just trying to see those who are raising their hands. Comment, question, whatever you want to do, but in 2 minutes. In any way, 2 minutes. But whatever you want to do, you must do. Data there, one. Oh, you will be concluding. Is you? Uzongena after 1, 2, 3. Oh, well, I'm
welcome the inputs by both Advocate Jele and Professor Madonsela. I just want to understand something. I had never heard of public protector investigating corruption in institutions of higher learning. And I would love to know maybe what might be the reason. I'm saying that because there's a lot of corruption in these institutions of higher learning. You'll go to Forte, you'll go to Walter Sisulu University, you'll go everywhere. There will be security tenders, there will be everything. There's a lot that is happening. But if you approach a public protector office, you'll be told that, no, we are only looking after government. And also, on this issue of inequalities, I'm happy that Mr. Nukesi, Judge Madlanga will be the last person in this topic. I would love to know why there are inequalities even in courts, because some of the judges would even tell you, well, why are you not briefing an advocate in this matter? Why are you coming for yourself? And you'll find out even if you are making a proper presentation, well-researched case, you are eloquent on it. But because you are an attorney, you look young, you are not a senior counsel, unfortunately for you, your opponent is a senior counsel, it's a lose. Because if the legal fraternity, there are inequalities, particularly in this dispensation of the LPC. How much more to the ordinary members of the community? So I would love to maybe get clarity and be advised along those things. Thank you.
Yes, I'll start with the last one and say that there was training that was done on the Equality Act, helping judges to understand hidden biases. I don't know if it's still done, and if it's not being done, thank God we have Judge Madlanga here from the Constitutional Court who can make sure that it gets done, because judges are human. And in the Public Protector team, we used to train each other about that humans are homosocial, and homosocial people tend to affirm people like themselves. Someone who dresses like you, who speaks like you, you don't make that decision, you don't consciously make that decision. It's what they call unarticulated biases or unarticulated assumptions. And Judge Marshall, who is the former Chief Justice of Massachusetts, and a proudly South African, or proudly formerly South African, has written a lot about that every judge should understand that 100% every human being has biases. Don't start with thinking that I'm above it, I've always been a good person, if I'm a man, I've never been sexist, if I'm white, I've never been racist, if I'm black, I've never been racially prejudiced. Don't start like that. Start by saying I've been brought up in a society that places a premium on certain things and devalues certain characteristics of humanity, and in what way am I being biased? I'm not gonna say judges are necessarily biased in that particular case, but it's important that judges begin to think about those things. And then about the Public Protector refusing to address university issues, it's never happened during my time and during Advocate Mushwana's time and Advocate Barco. I don't know if the current Public Protector, but just check it, because universities do fall within the jurisdiction of the Public Protector. What does happen though is institutions such as the Public Protector try to encourage local investigation structures. We would encourage universities to create their own ombudsman institutions, and would encourage government departments to do the same, so that these matters could be resolved at a localized level. And then it can only come to the Public Protector if there is a problem. There are many cases that during my time were investigated. I can't immediately recall one on corruption, but I can recall some on students being treated unfairly in exclusions, exam issues, etc., where we engaged. Some of the cases we dealt with were not through investigations, it would be through mediation and conciliation, and you would not then read about it in the media because the problem would be resolved. And then the colleague from Bombela, you asked very difficult questions, and they require a dialogue, really. And they require maybe a colloquium on how do we align the justice system with the challenges of the 21st century. And we think those things through. I cannot give you an answer from the top of my head, but I would say what drove me as a Public Protector would always be the vision behind the Constitution and the vision behind the Public Protector being an additional institution to strengthen constitutional democracy by ensuring accountability. The chairperson read a part from, the president read a part from President Mandela, where he said even the most benevolent of governments have within them propensities for human failings, and he explains why we have a polycentric accountability system that makes sure that there's always a place where somebody can go. And trust me, for people who don't have money, these structures that are not the courts, much as I love the courts, but these other informal structures are better for people who don't have money and who don't have the sophistry that is required to go to the courts. And how did I deal with this case? It wasn't willy-nilly. As I said, we did research to look at courts versus ombudsman institutions. We were there as a supplementary structure. We were there. Well, I'm not part of it anymore. But we were there as a supplementary structure, and we're there as a structure to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks. And the decision was not to review the court decision. Because remember, the court threw it back on technicalities. We don't know you. You don't have locus standi, and also that the instruction was not issued on. At the end of the day, let's talk about justice. At the end of the day, an ordinary person who can't afford build houses on behalf of the state. Is it proper that we should worship at the altar of rules and say, sorry, the rules don't allow us to help you to reclaim your money? For me, I thought that was improper. And when I handled cases, I looked at cases like that. But I would then do research from other ombudsman institutions and say, has this been done? And we found research, we found precedents here from Sweden. And I'm sure Deputy Minister would say, you don't again superimpose it as it is. And I agree, we didn't superimpose it. We looked at, the court didn't deal with the substantive issues around the money. It dealt with the technicalities. And we're a jurisdiction of proper conduct in state affairs. And if we allow improper conduct to happen in state affairs, that's unconstitutional. But in addition to that, we are then cementing impunity. Thank you.
If I can just come in and touch on a couple of the aspects of the questions that I would like to comment on. The first, with regards to Mr. and Mrs. G, is when I speak about the training of lawyers, I'm including lawyers who work in government. That is a legal person whose responsibility it is to draw up that contract and to react to the claim of that particular subcontractor needs to understand and appreciate the impact of the decision that they're making. It's why I say you'll end up with less litigation, because if it's done right, administrative law reviews should not be taking place, because the individuals whose responsibility it is to advise legally within those government departments fully understand and appreciate their responsibilities when those decisions are being taken, and have the opportunity to provide legal advice that is factored in and not quieted away. In addition to that, I genuinely do believe that there is a fundamental lack of use and understanding of what cooperative governance means. Section 41 of the Constitution is one of the least appreciated and used sections, because the comrade from Bombela specifically raised the fact that this had to do with conflicts between various organs of state. Those aspects of the Constitution are not sufficiently used, and that is one of the reasons why, for example, you will find municipalities, provinces, national government departments not sufficiently coordinating, because they need to, in the structure of our particular constitutional dispensation, to ensure that we get results. As regards the inequalities in courts, I'm actually going to throw the question back at Comrade President and my NADEL comrades, because I have a clear recollection of a resolution of NADEL that it would challenge and question, for example, the way in which silks are chosen and the elitist nature of that specific structure that is senior counsel. Was, according to a NADEL resolution, if I'm not mistaken, Johannesburg, and we were addressed by Pius Langa that evening, was going to be challenged and questioned, and we were going to actually put in question the entire process of having essentially an elitist club deciding whether or not others are worthy of joining their own elitist club, because that's how silks are chosen. Let's be honest about it. And that NADEL resolution, I'd be very curious to know whether or not we've taken it forward. And as we talk within the Legal Practice Council about how we're going to govern our profession, are we still going to have these kinds of processes? And is it not going to be about achievement rather than members of a club deciding whether or not you're worthy to join them, and what is going to be the criteria of the recognition of what is referred to in the Legal Practice Act as a senior, what is it, a senior legal practitioner or something along those lines? I can't remember the wording. I would like us to actually engage with that within the structures of NADEL, because as a former NEC member, I'd be curious to know whether or not we've implemented that. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade President. I must confess, after having a good lunch, I was falling asleep, but these two presentations have really woken me up. I want to address this point to both of you, because both of you come from a long line of activists. Don't you think that the injustices in this country is really caused by the system that we're in, which is essentially capitalistic, capital system? So wherever there are tenders, there will be people who are fighting for it. Wherever there's this, there'll be other people fighting for it, etc., etc. And unless the constitution and the society is fundamentally changed, we will never get justice.
I'm going to immediately answer that. I'm the daughter of a staunch Stalinist, so I was raised to believe that capitalism most certainly is a system that entrenches and inherently includes inequality in order to function. That would be, I'm not going to shift from that lest my father come and smite me.
No, well, I'm going to say capitalism is a pyramid scheme. But socialism hasn't worked. What has worked is social democracy. If you look at countries like Sweden, Norway, just generally the Nordic countries have done better when it comes to affirming the humanity of everyone and making sure that societal systems allow people social mobility. But again, if you're talking about social mobility, you're still talking about a pyramid scheme because you still have to go to the top, somebody still has to be at the bottom. But I still would think that our constitution, if we are true to it, can improve the quality of life of every person. Can it make everyone live like Bill Gates? No. But I'm not fatalistic to think that justice is impossible within our system. I think even the little that we have today has been because many judges do consider the social justice impact of their decisions. I spoke about what happens in court during okay, sorry, sir. I spoke about what happens in court during foreclosures. One judge would say the rule allows the auction to proceed without a reserve, but a judge like Justice Mlambo would say, can we try to be fair to both the bank and the person? So you're not trying to be fair to only the person or to be only fair to the bank. Because when you're saying you will allow an auction without reserve, as happened in the Ngwane case, that's one case we got involved in as the Tuma Foundation and Stellenbosch University. This guy literally had his house sold for 40,000 rand at an auction when its value was 500,000. And when he took this matter on review, the judge agreed, in saying that the judge said if there's a reverse, if there's a reserve price, it would work against the bank because the house won't be auctioned fast. But if we take the Ngwane case, we met with Standard Bank, and at the time we met with Standard Bank, they had gotten their 40,000 rand, which was still not the extent of the debt. And what they intended at that stage was to go back to Ngwane and ask him to pay the rest of the money. So nobody wins. Standard Bank doesn't win, and Ngwane doesn't. And we had a lovely discussion with them, and they agreed that the system is flawed, and they've asked that we work together to correct the system. What am I saying is that even if the system at the moment is flawed, there are little injustices that we can correct. Even during the height of apartheid, good lawyers and good justice, and good lawyers and good judges made a difference in people's lives. And today, judges of particularly at the SCA and the Constitutional Court, I'm seeing a lot of good progress that re-examines the rules or interprets the rules in a manner that advances social justice. And the North Gauteng High Court is also good in that regard. So say, don't despair. They say if you think you're too small to make a difference, think of a mosquito. It certainly does make a difference.
Can we take the last round? Okay. You would like to start, Minister, but let me identify this. Sir, the Deputy President here, the Treasurer from Queenstown, Comrade Krish. No, you have come before. Can I hear somebody fresh now? Then the Deputy Minister, you go first, and then they follow in that line.
No, it was just some responses, if I can. The one was just on the first question relating to the overlap with the inquiry into the fitness of Advocate Jiba and Advocate Mkhwebi to hold office. My understanding is there isn't an overlap. That issue was a question over, well, the issue that's in court is whether they should be struck off the roll, with the SCA finding that they shouldn't. And I think the Bar Council has appealed to the Constitutional Court. But I think and I don't really want to quote the SCA in the presence of the president of that court. I think she's maybe, I'm not sure if she's still here, but my recollection is that the SCA specifically said that this judgment wasn't about their fitness to hold office. So it's a different inquiry. Just that point. And then Prof. Madonsela, I have to take issue with you on Papuda. Most of it's sections of Chapter 5. Yes, I've been trying to find out what's the problem, and it was issues of National Treasury feeling it would cost too much. But the difference between Papuda and the Hate Crimes and Hate Speech Bill is that Papuda is a civil remedy. And that remedy is there, the equality courts, and they are being used, although they could be used more. Hate crimes is criminalizing. Already you've got a common law crime of crimen injuria. But is it best in South Africa in 2019 for these things to be dealt with by the common law? So I just wanted to make those comments. Thanks.
Chris, we come this way.
Well, thank you, Chair. You know, this shouldn't become a discussion about capitalism and socialism, but we can't let a comment like our honorable good champion for justice, Professor Madonsela, to just slip by. You know, capitalism is to say, okay, it's there, but socialism hasn't succeeded. It's only because of the rotten nature of capitalism that socialism has not succeeded. And the proof is there in history. And the first champions of socialism through a Marxist form of government was the Russian Revolution. And they failed in many ways because of the blockade by the Western capitalist governments. And we forget that it was a blockade. Russia was isolated. This is now way back. But take a more recent example, and we must allow ourselves to be up to date and care about countries that suffer, like Cuba. If we listen to our ambassador to South Africa a little more, we'll understand what capitalism is about. We also know countries in Africa experimented with socialism. And what happened to them? People like Patrice Lumumba, before he could get off the ground, was killed off. Other countries in Africa have been subjected to regime change. And regime change is what capitalism is doing. Now, South Africa, and I mean, we talk about social democracy, that's welfare states in the Nordic countries. They operate on a welfare system which takes care of everybody with very good high tax margins. South Africa has been trying to experiment with that. And I can tell you, even if they get too far, it's not easy because it's a very complex, you require a very sophisticated, wealthy country, not a state that is still developing out of 300 odd years of oppression and denial. So we in NADEL need to do something about it.
Comrade Krish, I have truly missed being in meetings with you, but can we give an opportunity to young people to ask some questions? We can debate this ad nauseum with you, Comrade Krish. Would that be okay?
I'll tell your father about
The other people, in case you and
Thank you, Chair. I'm Bismarck Pokwana from Queenstown. My question to the panel relates to the pointed issue to say, how do we ensure that South Africa becomes a better country? And in doing so, how do we ensure that the inequalities that are existing are in fact abolished or are done away with? My understanding is that we've got a good legislation. We've got lawyers here who are actually ensuring that the supremacy of our constitution is protected, the rule of law is protected. And we've been conscientized about the issue of using rules as against justice. But my challenge is, us now as lawyers, how then do we ensure that the gap that is there is actually minimized? Because currently, the poor becomes poorer, the richer becomes richer. But what is the role of attorneys in ensuring that we bridge that gap, taking into account that our goal is to ensure that these inequalities, they do get abolished and we have a better South Africa for all? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, President. To the panel, I'm a bit shocked that nothing was mentioned of the wealth of the country, the mineral resources of the country, as also a vehicle to address the inequalities, the issue of land, an issue of mineral resources. I mean, if you go to other places, as I believe that most of us in this room have been to, you go to places like Dubai, which is a full dictatorship that is flourishing. Everybody goes to Dubai. Everybody loves Dubai. Even those that stole from us go to Dubai. And it is a dictatorship. We are not addressing the issues that the countries that we look up to that are developed. I fully agree with what Comrade Krish has said. But we seem to be somehow sugarcoating over the real issues as to how to address the inequalities in this country. That is being left only to rules and the courts and the judiciary to really give people that. I mean, what is happening today, if you look at the manner with which of addressing some inequalities, as in the case of Mr. and Mrs. G, RDP houses. I mean, really, RDP houses are not addressing inequality. In fact, they have become a disgrace to our people in this country. If you look at where most of us in this room stay and live, and those that are being subjected to the RDPs, as in a less than 40 square family of 10 living in that, that is not a way of addressing inequalities. So, in short and in closing, what do we do, the state does with the mineral resources that could go a long way in addressing those inequalities? Mineral resources of this country are not in the hands of any of the citizens of this country. The pricing of those mineral resources on the world market is far below the world market prices. How do we then deal with these things to address the inequalities, seriously addressing the inequalities, not just leaving this to the judiciary? I mean, we are laboring Judge Mulambo, Judge Ledwaba, the Constitutional Court judges in delivering equality to our people through judgments. It's not going to happen. Our people are not looking for that. Our people are looking for tangible things on the ground, not in judgments. Thank you.
Is there anybody else, or shall I?
Yes.
There is one more.
I think I'm the last one.
Thanks very much, President.
Thank you very much. I think just to ride on the Deputy President's point, there's a question of culture, which I think that it's very fundamental in building a very united country. He made an example about Dubai. I am told, I've never been there though, that centrally to its economy is the question of culture. There's the respect of culture, and as a result, they are building that particular country with its own challenges, of course. But I'm saying in this country, I can't say that we have exploited that area.
If I may, I think I'll go first, and like that, Thuli can have the last word. I'm going to go back to my main input at the outset of this panel. I think one of the greatest tools we have, the greatest assets we have that we don't use, are our own people. And empowering our people to be in a position to properly challenge, speak, hold to account is critical. And as lawyers, the fact that we don't engage in ensuring rights awareness, I think, is a fundamental problem, and we need to do that. As lawyers, when you speak of not depending on judgments, I fully agree with you. And I believe that if lawyers within the structures, both within the private sector and the public sector, are properly trained and are properly focused on the constitutional values that underpin the work that they need to do, that they then, for example, will be at the helm of Inforum corporate culture with regards to corporate responsibility. What are we telling our corporate clients with regards to their community responsibilities? How are we making sure, as legal practitioners who are meant to think independently and who are meant to provide legal advice, that we advise them that constitutionally they have certain obligations towards the communities within which they mine, towards the communities within which they function, towards the communities within which they work. If we empower and we educate and we focus our work in that particular direction, then I believe precisely that we're dealing with issues at their root long before Judge Madlanga deals with the issue, long before. The aim of doing this right should actually be for Judge Madlanga to only have 5 applications coming to him every single year instead of thousands. And if we do it right from the get-go, I believe we can get there. That's how I believe, and I'll go back to the first questions that was asked, we can, as lawyers, help reduce inequalities. And I am speaking from this perspective because of where I am. I'm speaking from this perspective because I've been a member of this organization for over 20 years. And I'm speaking from this perspective precisely because of the power that that empowerment has in the hands of the average citizen. I cannot tell you the difference it used to make for the daily lives and the realities of human beings when we would spend, as the NADEL project, a morning telling them, what are your problems? My problem is I can't get maintenance. Okay, you can do 1, 2, and 3. What is your other problem? My problem is my RDP house is cracked. Okay, this is where you can go. The fundamentals of day-to-day life, allowing them to engage, and then training the lawyers that are within those government structures, as I'm repeating, to make sure that they understand the values that they have an obligation to uphold. The culture we need, I think, to focus on is our constitutional culture. The reality is that this is a country that is so varied in its fundamental values and cultures and norms that the only one we have in common is the constitutional one. And I sincerely believe that that is the culture we need to build more consistently and mainstream in order to achieve a greater equality. Comrade Krish knows I was raised this way. I don't believe that in the system that we have today we will ever have no inequality. I believe in the system that we currently have, failing a revolution, all we can aim to do is decrease inequalities. And at the very least we should be working on that, because we certainly are not there yet by a mile.
Thank you, dear colleagues. DM, I agree with you that there is a difference between Pepuda and the hate speech. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to clarify, because other people may have thought that I was confusing the two. I was saying the reason people engage in hate speech is because of what they think. And the Equality Act, Chapter 5, was supposed to take society where we found it in 1994, and then implement measures that would take society to where the Constitution wants society to be. And part of that would be to deal with mindsets. What I'm saying is that by criminalizing hate speech, we're not going to end the problem. What you're going to be left with, you're going to be left with unarticulated assumptions. People are still racist, but because they don't call you a monkey, you can't even challenge it. In fact, you're going to find it's even more difficult to challenge racism, sexism, because people don't verbalize the assumptions, but they treat you as less than. So there was a careful thinking behind the Equality Act. But what we have disclosed, Deputy, should concern every lawyer in this room and every Democrat in this room. But we call ourselves a democracy. And we say the will of the people shall be reflected in the laws of the land. The people wrote a constitution. It was a transparent process. The people included in that constitution a value to achieve equality, because we knew that we were starting with systemic and structural inequality. We're not starting as Sweden, where discrimination is an occasional aberration. We knew that we needed to engage in systematic transformation, not in the economy, not in business ownership, in every aspect of society, and we created that law. So there was the will of the people, which was then expressed in the legislature, in the executive passing that law, and then the executive itself submitted in its entirety. The law was submitted to Parliament. Parliament approved it after a public consultation. It takes one department, the Treasury, all by itself to stop the implementation of the law. And that started whilst I was still in the Department of Justice. There was a guy called Roland White who was very clear he didn't want that law. And you must remember that there were political parties that were against it. Now, Treasury stops the law because it's going to be costly to business. We are going to have, we've started a process in Stellenbosch, which is about helping people to assess the likely impact of all laws and policies on social justice. And the first one that we're having is next week, that's looking at towards an inclusive and sustainable economy. However, looking at the cost, you must look at the cost across the board. But we must also look at the cost of freedom. They cost us peace. They cost business itself and a climate that attracts investment. Because investment is attracted by a climate where there's stability. And in cases where there's extreme inequality, you're not going to get stability. The World Bank has done studies to this effect. IMF has done similar studies. So Treasury looked at a myopic assessment of the cost of injustice. And they've cost us all. So my view to government would be, we can't allow one department to overrule the will of the people. 20 years into democracy, a part that was well thought out because we knew there was systemic injustice is sitting. And my view is, then there was RIA, which I understand the presidency, thanks God, has thrown away. I hope Professor Jonathan Claren was telling the truth when they said you've thrown away the RIA. Because RIA was that regulatory impact assessment that only looked at impact on business, not impact on grandmothers, not impact on Mr. G, not impact on women, impact on rural-urban divide, not impact on restructuring the economy. The UN has a lovely slogan say, Deputy President, that says leave no one behind. Sadly, when people interpret that slogan, they mean leave no one behind in giving them jobs. No, that's not that. The UN leave no one behind means leave no one behind in all areas of life. So in ownership of the economy, in ownership of businesses, in enjoying human rights such as freedom from violence and freedom from everything. And the discussion we're going to have on Monday is going to have your mainstream economists, the ones that have brought us here, and other economists like Ben Turok, who think you can't keep doing things the same way as you did them yesterday if you want a different result. And we'll see how we engage. It's not going to be a one-day process. It's going to be an engagement because nobody has the right answers. All of us know that we want to arrive at a society where everyone's humanity is affirmed, where everyone's potential is freed, where everyone's life is improved. But we also want a society where this structural inequality, where white and male is at the top of the pyramid and everyone else is down there, needs to be restructured. Whether we go into socialism or we stay with capitalism, I used to be a socialist, and where I disagree with you, Comrade Krish, and then coming to you, Comrade Krish, as you have been called by my colleague here, is it's not true that communism failed only because of interference by capitalism. When I was still a Marxist as a student, I threw away every criticism of Stalin, but now we know that he was an evil man. We know that. He killed a whole lot of people. I dismissed everything. We call those people Trotskyites. Everyone who criticized Stalin was crazy and was... And I remember one of our recommended books in sociology had the title, The Iron Law of Oligarchy. But trust me, look at all organizations. The iron law of oligarchy is true. Every organization eventually has an elite that gravitates to the top, and that elite picks up most of the cream for itself. Look at here, for example, Treasury comes and says the Equality Act is going to be costly. But Treasury, out of the blue, comes in with BEE together with DTI. But who benefits from BEE? The black elite, and the white elite stays in place, doesn't get displaced because it's an assimilationist. Our current approach to BEE is an assimilationist approach. So we keep everything intact, but all of that was myopic. What we're saying to people is that all of us will have to give up a little bit of room for others in the interest of peace. This is what the World Bank says, this is what the IMF says, this is what the UN says, this is what the UN Global Compact says, that we will all have to give up a little bit of space, whether it's land, whether it's wealth, whether it's what, in order to include others everywhere. And we're doing that as part of Ubuntu. We're doing that to create a world where everyone has a vested interest in that world. And I'm going to say that socialism, we still have to come up with something between capitalism and socialism. I'm not convinced that communism, as it has been tried anywhere else in the world, is necessarily the solution. Ask people in China, ask people in Russia. And yes, and I come from there, and I won't even just say my father was like that, like my colleague here. I was a communist, I was a Marxist. I have changed my mind. I'm a humanist. I really, like Pixley Gaseme, I am saying we need to build a world where everyone's place in society is not determined by the circumstances of their birth. There will be elements of communism, but not frozen in communism. And that's why I'm saying social democracy. And somebody has said to me, I think it's Krish who's saying, the Nordic countries are not the best way to look at because their emphasis on welfare. Well, as a starting point, welfare is good. The fact that we have fees must fall is because if you're poor, you can't afford to be average. Do you know that? But as soon as you don't get that 60%, NSS offloads you. As soon as you don't get that 60%, these scholarships offload you. But my child, as long as he still has a place at the university, even if he's just getting that 50%, that keeps him there. He's not going to be offloaded. But poor people have to do that, to walk that extra mile. And then we wonder, why are they angry? So for me, that welfare as a baseline is fine, dear people. Let's just make sure that we get everyone on the boat. It's not an answer to everything because we still have to deal with wealth. I was meeting with a colleague that I like very much who was saying the solution is just fix the education for black people, then we'll have equality. That's not true. Education simply means that we all are competing at the same level. But just one last story, if I may be allowed. There's a woman who teaches social justice, and she told this story to us at Harvard. She teaches social justice to 8-year-olds. It started with an 8-year-old who was saying, my father is angry that black people, women, and people with disabilities get extra points whenever opportunities are being evaluated. And my father thinks this is unfair. So this lady then made these 8-year-olds wear pink shirts and blue shirts, and then said, today we're going to have a race. But when I blow the whistle the first time, only the blues have a right to run. And then they run miles and miles and miles. And then after they've run quite a number of miles, like maybe after an hour or so, she then says, when I blow the second whistle, the pinks can run as well. And you are now equal. And then the pinks cry and say, no, but we'll never catch up with the blues. And she says, you are now equal, you run. And they all run. What happens is that in the pattern, the blues will always be ahead. Some of the fast pinks, like your Castor, Semenya, Wade van Niekerk, are going to catch up with the slowest of the blues. But none of the pinks will naturally ever catch up with the fastest of the blues. So yes, you'll get a pattern of inequality between the blues, but you'll always get a structural pattern of inequality where the pinks are at the end. And the thinking behind the Equality Act, Chapter 5, was to make sure that we find measures that address the imbalances created by the fact that we got the blues to run a mile first before we said, now we're equal. But in our case, you must understand that it's even more complex than that. You would say to the pinks, you run without your shoes. There's so many other factors that have been included. So going forward, I would say to justices, continue on the front where you are. We're not saying we're going to fix society through the judiciary, say. We are saying the judiciary, though, when confronted with issues that look like the run-of-the-mill justice issues, the judiciary should think about the structure of society and say, when I make this decision in the name of justice, will I achieve justice or will I exacerbate the existing gap between law and justice? And we're saying to policymakers, when you make any policy, that's not about equality. It could be just a law about land. It could be a law about where are you going to build your RDP houses. Think about, will this exacerbate spatial disparities, or will it reduce? And talking about spatial disparities, that's one area where government had an opportunity to change things. Government came in and found that black houses were built in townships outside the city. And when government came, when it had now the power to use the land it had anyway to build for the poor, it still chose to build in the townships. Not because government was evil, it was by not thinking through what will be the impact of what I'm about to do on equality and poverty. Because poverty and equality feed on each other. And a simple example is, if you have an auction in Khayelitsha, the best piece of art will fetch at most 2,000 rand. If you have an auction in Stellenbosch, where I live, the worst piece of art will fetch at least 5,000 rand. No, but I'm talking about how poverty feed on each other, spatial disparities. With if the poor are all by themselves and the rich are all by themselves, the poverty feeds on each other, and therefore that's why we've become the most unequal society, with our Gini coefficient at 0.63%. Poverty everyone complains about poverty. Do you know that poverty among white people is at 1%? Do you know what is poverty among black people? Poverty across the board in South Africa is 55.5% across the board. But among black people classified under the law as African, 64.2%. Not because somebody sits behind the desk and decides, I'm going to keep black people behind. It's because we don't think about everything we do and say, will it advance equality or will it exacerbate inequality? Will it reduce poverty or will it exacerbate existing poverty? And what we're doing at Stellenbosch, working with everyone else who's interested, and we're inviting the presidency and NADEL into the party, is let's not blame anyone, because nobody sat down and decided to design an unequal society, at least not after 1994. It was through unconscious actions that we've landed where we are. But now that we know, 25 years into democracy, that acting unconsciously leads to unintended consequences, we then now say, let's act consciously at all levels, including litigation. Thank you.
You have any concluding words? I think this brings us to the end of this session. I hope that out of this session we'll be able as NADEL to reconsider ourselves, our positions, particularly those resolutions that, for instance, Comrade Kanya directed us to. Also the suggestions that have been thrown. Professor, that our justices are also here, and you raise this issue of judgments and other particularly judgment as means to intervene and on these questions of inequality, proper interpretation of the Constitution, which must give effect to realization of the socio-economic rights. You'll find out that in most of these in most of these courts, when you read judgments, they are all about having considered this application, considered the procedure prescribed by Rule 12 sub Rule B. This application does not qualify, and therefore I dismiss. The question is, what is happening about the real issue that was brought to court? Why wasted a lot of time about compliance with that particular rule? These are the very questions that we are telling us. A lot of questions are decided there was really undue delay in this matter, and based on this undue delay, I dismiss this matter. What a waste of time. What about the issue there? If you stole my car 5 years, I saw it now, and I can see it is there. Why you ask me where I was in 5 years? A new jurisprudence must come. Whereas, in Kumbu, somebody stole sheep, a case of theft is open. Now they see 1 or 2 of them, they wait 10. Magistrate, listen to the case, there's evidence. At the end of the day, you find the accused, you are hereby sentenced to go 10 years in prison, 6 years, something like that, or you pay 5,000 rand. What about the sheep? This guy, you want his sheep back. Nothing is said about the sheep. And then the complaint goes around and said, look, I came here for my sheep. This guy is taken to jail now. What? We have to think afresh. We have to shift our thinking. So what we are trying to say to us, Professor, that these are kind of judicial officers that NADEL, for many years from its formation, has also been talking about. There's a kind of a lawyer that we want to build. Persons who understand the challenges of the society and the directions that the society seeks to take. Not just somebody who's just come to, I mean, in fact, this is a problem. Most of people that we go around say, hey, he's very clever. I ask, why you say he's clever? No, man, he used to pass with distinction all those courses. We missed the boat. The guy has a good memory. It's not that he's intelligent, he has a good memory. And then this is a kind of education. Thank you very much. We appreciate it for this panel. Yeah. I guess now I will call you guest and then hand over the... Thank you. I guess we can, because we are going to break, but before that, because the National Director of Public Prosecution will be joining us shortly, I was to propose that we take a break, but there was the Deputy Minister addressed us. Some people had some questions, but we didn't give you an opportunity for those questions. We will allow strictly 10 minutes for that. After that, we go for a break. We take a short break, and then the National Director surely will be here by that time. As we're waiting, we can just take questions if anyone has questions on the speech by the Deputy Minister. Before we move, if we don't have questions, we'll... Okay, just one question. There's a question that you must look, so I'm sorry, Minister, you must take questions, just take questions.
Thank you, President. Maybe just one question. Honorable DM, it may not be specifically to what you have said, but to specifically the current situation. I'm talking about the Constitution. To what extent can it be used to address the injustices of the past? Because when you read the preamble, it says, we recognize the injustices of the past and we recognize those who fought for it and the like. And in the middle it says, through our freely elected representatives, we adopt this Constitution. And then thereafter it says, to heal the injustices of the past and to create a society based on human rights, social justice, and the like. My question is specifically based to the question of what the people of South Africa have been expecting: land. They have been looking and waiting to say the joint CRC, Joint Constitutional Review Committee, has been consulting them throughout the countries, all the provinces and the like. Now, at the end of the 5th Parliament, we hear that the ad hoc committee is going to draft a closing report to say the 6th Parliament will then consider whatever work has been done. So people are starting now to wonder whether will the land ever be returned, more especially those who were dispossessed, forced removals, and to address the injustices of the past, because the dispossession is one of the injustices of the past. That is basically my question, DM. Thank you very much.
Are there any others or not? If there are no other questions, is there another one?
In fact, President, it's not necessarily a question mine. Safe to say, the DM is aware that in each and every AGM of NADEL, we've been talking about the question of briefing patterns. Now, these injustices now in the profession, and it's something which is there. He knows when he sleeps, when he wakes up, wherever he's going to meet with attorneys. So obviously, I suppose when he responds to JB's question, he will touch even on this one. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Mr. Diamond. The question that I have to DM is with regards to compliance. I've dealt with matters where I will call them migrants, people who come and study law within the Republic, and then they're allowed to do articles. They go and appear in court in accordance to the rules and regulations. But then when it comes to admission, there's a part, I believe, from my own perspective, it has to do with inequality. So looking at issues of addressing equalities within the society. So as attorneys, democratic attorneys, when we look at equality, are we only focusing on equality within the jurisdiction of South Africa, or it becomes equality, which then has got a ripple effect outside the borders and jurisdiction of the country? By looking at the preamble of the Constitution, which says everyone within the Republic, it then says that a person then needs permanent residence for them to be admitted as an attorney. So I don't understand, probably it might be the wrong platform where I'm raising this issue, but the rules would say you are able to appear in court even though you are not a South African, even though you don't have permanent residence. But when it comes to the admission as an attorney, it then says, it kicks in to say you need to have permanent residence. So what is the effect of permanent residence? What changes does it make for a person to be admitted as an attorney within the Republic of South Africa, taking into cognizance the fact that that person would have been appeared in court, also in the regional court, during the time of serving articles? Thank you.
Sorry. I think if that's it, can I, because I think you want to break for tea and then the NDPP is coming. Maybe on the last question, it's the issue of migration is a difficult issue. We have one of the main factors of xenophobia in South Africa is related to a scarcity of resources and competition for those resources. So if you take students from, and look, also let me put the context of, you know, the borders of Africa were devised in Berlin in the 1870s or whatever. Some of our borders in South Africa are lines in the sand. If you look at the border between Mozambique and KwaZulu-Natal, it's literally a straight line in the sand. But a lot of the problems are over resources. And the problem with students coming from other countries to study is when it comes to work opportunities, should those work opportunities not go to South Africans first? So the number of students at our universities, South African students, who can't get articles because there are limited places, should foreign students be getting those? So it's not actually so much a question of that they can't get admitted. It's the question that Home Affairs are asking is, should they in fact even be getting articles? I had raised it with some of the universities. Are you allowing people to study here or taking people in under false pretenses? that they will be able to get articles, and they tell me that they make it clear. This was from University of Cape Town. Unfortunately, Professor Pierre de Vos has just stepped out. I'm not sure the situation in Stellenbosch, but yeah, that's basically the problem. There's a shortage of resources. There's a shortage of articles, a shortage of pupillage. Shouldn't it be South African students who get those opportunities? But it's a difficult question. It's a complex question, and it's more difficult as well. I mean, if you look at Lesotho, Swaziland, they are there because of our apartheid past. Then on the briefing patterns issue, look, a comment was made earlier about problems with state legal services, and there is quite an ambitious plan to overhaul state legal services completely, which will, I think, be one of the main tasks of the new administration. So we fully accept there are problems with the state attorney's offices. However, on briefings patterns, as you know, the department puts out the details of the briefing patterns. It's on our website. I've just checked that the briefs for February are up there. They have the name of the advocate, the name of the case, the client department, and so on. And the figures as far as the briefing of not briefing white males are very good. There is a problem. I was just looking for February in Port Elizabeth. I'm not sure where it seemed that there were a number of white males who were briefed. But generally around the country, President Nochesi, when you raised it in your speech, I went and looked. And it's very few white males that are getting briefed, or white women that are getting briefed. So please have a look at that. That's specifically the briefs from state attorney offices. And then to I don't know, can you be a member of NADEL if you're a member of a Chapter 9? But anyway, I was going to say the member of the Human Rights Commission who used to be a member of NADEL, but I wasn't sure. No, look, the Constitution should be transformative. I do think, Krish, there's an element, and sorry, Thuli, where you can argue that law is there to protect capitalism and property relations, that was the origin of law. So to some extent, Prof, I would side with Krish, but our Constitution is specifically, as you know, there to address the imbalances of the past. I think on the land issue, the question would be, how do I put this, because it's quite a controversial topic, and I see you've got Floyd tomorrow. But the issue would be to what extent, and you know people like Tembeka and Lukai Tobi argue that we don't need to change Section 25, that there was enough in there to allow for land expropriation and so on. So to how much is the problem? I mean, clearly we've got a huge problem with land. Redistribution has not taken place to the extent, anywhere near the extent that it should have. We can't carry on as a country with these unequal ownership patterns. But how much of that was government policies not working? Where did this willing buyer, willing seller aspect come from? It's not, as far as I know, in any legislation. Was it an issue of again, a problem from the state side, that when there were cases in the land claims court or before the other courts where there should have been appeals if the judgments were not that progressive. So I think that yeah, we maybe could make Section 25 clearer, but the main issue is to address the incredible imbalance in land ownership and the whole imbalance in race as well, and I mean wealth and race. Maybe then just the last point, Mr. President, if you will allow me. You said earlier you were very critical of one of the ANC members of Parliament in the debate on the issue of the renaming of the airport, Dikeledi Magadzi. And you said that she had said that she'd criticized or had said that Winnie Mandela was not a person of stature or substance or whatever. Now, and that's, I think, on the basis of a video clip that was circulating on social media from an opposition party. And actually, if you look at the full clip, and if you look at her speech, and I've got her speech here, it's not what she was saying. She spoke about the fact that we, as ANC, we believe that it is vital that such a significant airport should be named after someone who's a tried and tested individual whose appeal is of a paragon of virtue in society. Full stop. That's all she says. She wasn't talking about Winnie Mandela. She goes on then to talk about different options for renaming, and particularly that the airport should be named after a woman. And she says the ANC is cognizant of the contribution made by heroines such as, but not limited to, Mam Lillian Ngoya, Mam Albertina Sisulu, Mama Krotoa, Mama Winifred Madikizela Mandela, Mem Mantatisi, Mam Sophie de Bruyn, and many who should not left behind. So that's the full context, and I really would urge people to either read the speech or look at the full video speech of her speech. She was not saying that Mam Winnie Mandela is not a person who the airport should be named after. It was a general point, and she then went on to say that she is among the people that we should be considering naming the airport after. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Bahleli bonke kwano